Chapter 1 of the GAON of VILNA. An extraordinary child. The day had started with a gentle breeze, but as the clouds rose and the winds began to blow frequently, a young woman was about to cross the bridge over the Romania River. The bridge was a high one, and the river below was very deep. In her arms the woman clutched a pillow on which lay a sleeping baby wrapped tightly in a white blanket. Suddenly, a huge gust of wind threw the woman against the bridge railings, and the pillow that had held her baby daughter fell from the arms into the river. "My child!" shouted the helpless mother. The people on the bridge who had seen the accident all looked down. All they saw was the dark, rushing river beneath them. There was no sign of the baby. The desperate mother screamed frantic words of prayer, begging Hashem to save her child, her treasure. No one dared jump into the roaring waters, for how will they find her child? Suddenly, something flashed between the waves. It was a pillow floating into the surface, and it was the fate. A cry of joy burst from the crowd. Miraculously, the pillow was stopped by a huge boulder. In an instant, some Jewish men jumped into the freezing water. As they all held to one another, one of them reached for the pillow. "The child is alive!" the rescuer called out. "Come to my house," a woman in a nearby house said to the shaking young mother. "I live right here. We can warm the baby up." Carefully, the mother lay her shivering little daughter near the stove, but instead of quieting down the baby's wailing, suddenly it increased. It seemed that she had been placed too close to the coals, and her feet had gotten badly burned. "Water, water!" came the desperate cry of the mother. Water was quickly brought, and the baby was bathed to soothe her burns. After a while, the little girl's sobbing slowed down. She grew quieter and quieter until it was clear that she was no longer in pain. The baby girl, whose name was Kira, had been saved twice that day, first from the water and then from the fire. It was a double miracle that the people of the village of Sela would talk about for many years to come, especially when, after Kira grew up, she married a young scholar by the name of Reb Shlomo Zalman. Kira and her husband were to become the parents of great GAON, a holy man, Reb Eliyahu of Vilna, known as the Vilna GAON, or the GAON of Vilna. Eliyahu was their oldest son, born on the first day of Pesach, 5408. Even when Eliyahu was still a small child, people realized that he was extremely bright. He knew so much at such a young age. Absolutely information like a sponge. And he understood everything that anyone told him. In those days, the second day of Shavuos, the Rabbanim and Talmid Chachamim would gather in the shul to celebrate. Fathers and sons of all ages also came to join the celebration. The Rabbanim would throw out all types of Torah questions for the children to answer. Whoever gave the right answer would be brought to the middle of the circle, and the Rav who had asked the question would dance with him on his shoulders. During one such celebration, a Talmid Chacham turned to the children and asked, "Who can tell me where in the Torah Avram's name is mentioned twice, aside from the Akedah, where his name is called out twice?" While the others were still thinking, Eliyahu bursted out. In Parshas Toldos it says, "And these are the generations of Yitzchak, son of Avram." Avram was the father of Yitzchak. All eyes turned to the young child who had replied without even taking a minute to think. Then another question was thrown to the audience. Where in the Torah is there a pasuk of 8 words, all of which end with the final mem? Again, before the others could even start to think, the high, thin voice of little Eliyahu was heard. To their amazement, his answer was correct, just as before. There is a pasuk in Vayishlach which has 8 words, all ending with the letter Mem. Everyone was astonished at the child's knowledge. I see that you know what you learned very well. Perhaps you can tell me where there's a pasuk of 2 words in a row. Another Talmid Chacham asked. After a moment of thought, Eliyahu had answered. There are 3 such psukim. One is in Bereshit where it says, Vayaled Noch es Shemai es Chaim. The second one is in Vayishlach where it says, Al Trikim, Ki Gam Ze Lech Ben. And the third one is in Beshalach where it says, Ki Yad Lekeha. The questioner was so excited by the 3 correct replies of the little boy that he grabbed Eliyahu and joyfully swung him up his shoulders and began dancing with him. Soon many others joined, forming a great happy circle. When they were tired of dancing, the questions continued, but now they got harder and harder. Each time Eliyahu immediately gave the correct answer, it was clear that he knew the entire Tanakh by heart. The amazement of the crowd increased. More than once, Eliyahu was swung upon a man's shoulder with everyone joining hands around him. This way, how the circle of Vilna became aware of how the holy special child. Although Eliyahu learned in the local cheder by the time he was 6, the Melamed had nothing more that he could teach him. His father decided that he would become Eliyahu's teacher. Before his 6th birthday, while the other children laid shoulder or threw tops, Eliyahu started learning Gemara. He never joined war wrestling games where 2 boys sat piggy bank on the other boy and tried to pull each other down because, as he explained, I cannot pull down a friend. He kept away from seesaws for a similar reason. I don't want to be the cause of a friend popping down each time I go up. When Eliyahu was 6.5 years old, his father taught him a very complicated piece of Gemara. Most adults would have found it difficult to understand. As to do so, one had to remember various other pieces of Gemara from many different places and then fit all those pieces together into one idea. It was something like a difficult puzzle, only much harder. If one didn't fit every idea into its correct place, the whole picture would become spoiled. If one forgot just one part, he could become all mixed up. Eliyahu's father wanted him to repeat this piece of Gemara so that the city's Rab and the many Torah scholars who studied with him might hear the way the child explained it. Eliyahu was not afraid. He walked to the front of the shul and turned his face to the scholars who sat waiting from the yard. Came the voices of the other boys his age playing games, but Eliyahu heard nothing. He stood straight and tall and repeated what he had prepared without any mistakes. He spoke so easily and clearly, you might have thought he was speaking about the weather outside. When he finished, a murmur of admiration moved through the room. Many of the scholars rushed to Eliyahu's father to praise the child who had such extraordinary talents. The group of scholars couldn't stop talking about the child, but one person said, "He did a great job. But I find it hard to believe that he understood everything that he was saying." "It's true," said another person. "Clearly the boy has an exceptional memory. But who says that he can put together something like this on his own?" The Rav Cheskel tried to put an end to this discussion. "I'm sure Eliyahu understands what he learns and can do the same thing on his own all over again." "How could you assume that?" the visiting Rav asked. "Remember, he is only a child." "There was an easy way to find out," Rav Cheskel replied. He turned to the child. "I'm going to ask you 3 difficult questions. Take this Gemara into the next room and try to see if you can find the answer." It didn't take long for the child to emerge from the room with all the right answers, and even some ideas of his own that he had added. All listened in silence. When he finished, they jumped to their feet and rushed to hug and kiss him. Now they all knew that Rav Cheskel was correct, that the child was one of a kind. When the son of the great Rav David, Kat Zablon, visited Vilna and heard about Eliyahu, he begged Rav Shlomo Zalman to let him take the boy back home with him to Rav David. I think that my father would be very interested in teaching you, Eliyahu, he said. Rav Shlomo Zalman was happy for Eliyahu to have such a special teacher. Indeed, Eliyahu was very pleased to study under Rav David, but after teaching the unbelievable child for a few months, Rav David no longer considered the 7-year-old as a student. The boy had reached a level where he could study all parts of the Torah on his own. By the age of 8, having already mastered Tanakh and Gemara, Eliyahu set aside a few hours of the day to study the secrets of the Torah, known as Kabbalah. Only a few great scholars in each generation knew, though, to understand these parts of the Torah. While he ate, he studied astronomy. Some astronomers had put together models of the planets. When it was shown to Eliyahu, the young child immediately pointed out the mistakes that the scientists had made. Eliyahu's days revolved around the study of Torah. He would often set learning goals for himself that he had might be a certain time in order to push himself to study more and more. At the age of 11, he undertook the complete study of 2 Gemaras before the next Simchas Torah, but he was so busy with the other studies that when Simchas Torah arrived, he hadn't even begun either of those Gemaras. That didn't pose a problem for the young Hillel. Towards evening, as everyone else in the city danced and sang in honor of the Torah, Eliyahu took a volume of the Gemara, Minchos, in his hands and began learning. Later that night, after a Yom Tov meal, he went right back to his studies. Rav Shlomo Zalman and his family were hosting an important guest that Simchas Torah, Rav Michal, the Rav of Danvi. The guest noticed the child take a new Gemara in his hands and began learning it for the first time. But he never dreamed that the boy intended to finish the Gemara as well as another one before the end of Yom Tov. In the middle of the night, Rav Michal woke up. He could hear a voice of young Eliyahu rise and fall as the boy studied more and more of Minchos. The guest put on his robe and tiptoed over to the hard-working boy. He stood behind him and noticed how fast he was turning the pages. Had the child actually learned 50 pages of Gemara in the past couple of hours? Rav Michal tapped Eliyahu on the shoulder. That's no way to study Gemara, he told him. Even great Talmidei Chachamim need a lot more time than that to learn 50 pages. Let me ask you some questions to see how much you remember of what you just learned. Rav Michal asked the boy a question. Immediately, Eliyahu responded with the right answer. Rav Michal asked more questions, each one harder than the one before. But again and again, Eliyahu gave him the correct answer. Soon, Rav Michal was smiling. I was wrong, he said. You have really learned well. It is late now. I am going back to sleep. Good Yom Tov. He left the boy to his learning and went back to bed. When Rav Michal awoke to start his day, the stars were still shining in the sky, but the darkness of the night was fading. He washed his hands and went looking for Eliyahu. The boy was still learning. He had finished the Gemara and was halfway through the next. Rav Michal quizzed the boy again and again. Eliyahu was always ready with the answer. You don't need me or anyone else to test you. I'll leave you in your studies, said Rav Michal. A few hours later, Eliyahu had finished the second Gemara just as he had promised himself. Finally, Eliyahu got up. He sang and danced in honor of the Torah together with all the other Jews in Vilna. Eliyahu continued to study one Gemara after another. Even though he already knew more than most Talmidei Chachamim in the generation, he did not slow down. To stay awake through the night, he would take off his shoes and socks and put bare feet into a pail of icy water. Before he was 13, he knew so much of the secret parts of the Torah that he began making a golem. A golem is a very strong creature that looks like a man and could move like a man. It is powered by the name of Hashem in its mouth. Only very great Rabbanim who know the secrets of the Torah very well could make a golem. In the middle of his work, Eliyahu was shown by Shemayim that he had to stop what he was doing, and so of course he stopped. By the time he was bar mitzvah, Eliyahu knew more than many famous rabbis. He continued learning without stop, sleeping very little. He ate 2 meals a day, one in the morning and one at night, each consisting of 2 slices of dry bread soaked in water. The years went by. The people began calling him a GAON, which is a title used to describe tzaddikim who lived hundreds of years ago, when Torah scholars knew so much more than they did and did more recent times. The GAON was absolutely brilliant. He was 20 when he married. His wife Hannah did all that she could to make sure her husband was able to study Torah. As more and more people heard about him, streams of visitors came knocking on his door. He would often slip away and go to a little hut in the forest where he'd be able to learn in peace. At these times, no one but his wife knew where he was. She would bring him food and drink, but she would never tell anyone else where he had gone. In adaptation in the Torah studies, the GAON also became an expert in the science. When he began to study the pathological side of medicine, his father advised that he stop. If you become a doctor, people will be constantly begging you to heal them, which will take away precious time from your learning. Chapter 2 will begin the next video.